good afternoon. So today we have no one but two great speakers. The first one is Alan Gunshor. He has a bachelor degree from Penn State and an MBA at USC. And he's known to be a serial entrepreneur and also an angel investor, as well as he's been in charge of leading several launches of online services and marketplaces for tech giants such as Microsoft and Oracle. And he's currently working on the climate crisis and looking for creative solutions. And then we have Mark Dooley. He has a bachelor from Northwestern University, and an MBA from here, UC Berkeley. So go Bears, I guess. He's a marketing executive with more than 15 years of experience. And he has worked for several companies, such as Coca-Cola, eBay, GoDaddy, and some startups, basically focusing on either gaming and photography. Right now, he's the lead product marketing for Degrees Business at Coursera, which is an education tech company. Welcome.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here with my college roommate, and Mark and I went to American University for a semester in 1988 during the Bush-Dukakis election.
Yep, the first Bush.
During that semester. And we shared a room together at American University. That was called the DC semester, or it was affiliated with American University. And we've been friends ever since. And Mark decided to come with me and ping some questions off me, so I appreciate that. A little bit about me. I grew up in Yardley, Pennsylvania, which, if I show my hand as the state of Pennsylvania, Yardley is right there. And grew up in that area. My mom and dad lived and worked in New York City and Philadelphia, so we lived right between there. And I went to high school in Princeton, New Jersey, went to Penn State University for undergrad in State College, and then came out to California and went to USC for MBA school. We're gonna get into my background a little bit, but just some things about me, kind of off the resume and off the beaten path. I consider myself a creative person, a creative business person, an inventor, and somebody who follows their own path. And I think you'll see that when we talk about the things that I've done in my career, and Mark has some insight into all of that, and we'll learn about him as well. So let's get right into it.
I'll just give you a little more background about myself, just so you can have context for later as we get into some of the questions and answers. But you heard from the introduction, I have probably a more traditional business background in that, after undergrad and the Haas school, I stayed in the Bay Area, worked for a little while in the advertising field. If you've watched Mad Men, I was the account guy. I was the Peter of that character set. And then I went client side, and I did work for Coca-Cola, helped that company move into sort of online loyalty programs and retention programs. And then worked for a number of companies in the e-commerce space like eBay, and I do currently work at Coursera, which is essentially online education. You guys probably work with an LMS as students, like Canvas or Blackboard, right? So we're a little bit, they aren't direct competitors of ours, but we sort of integrate with those platforms. But yeah, I mean, the great story is Alan and I were really tight friends during that semester in Washington, D.C., and then we kind of lost touch for a while. And we're doing our own things, and I think that was really like before the era of social media. And then lo and behold, we ran into each other at the DMV in San Francisco. Yep. And since then have really connected. You know, I'd say every couple months we get together, share anecdotes about work, play tennis, just. And I think it's a testament to having a good network of both friends and colleagues to kind of support you through one's career trajectory.
Yeah. So let me just start off with this. Mark is a good friend of mine. I keep a lot of my friends that I've met across the years. I've got a friend of mine that I've known since I was 2 years old. We went through kindergarten, actually nursery school, kindergarten, all the way through college together. And I tend to keep friends for a very long time. And that's a very important thing to me. Mark has taught me a lot about marketing and the brands that he's worked on, and some amazing brands like Coca-Cola and eBay. For my work history, my first job happened when I was 14. I wanted a little extra spending money, so I became a Little League umpire. I've had many of the same types of jobs that you all have had before you were 21. You can see on the bottom left, I was a McDonald's cook at age 16. I worked for the Wall Street Journal headquarters as an intern, primarily because the chief administration officer was my neighbor, and I shoveled his snow. So that got me an internship when I was 17 at the headquarters. I was a camp counselor teaching lacrosse. I was a pedicab driver in Waikiki. I was when we were in DC together, I was an intern for Joe Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy's son. And I was a real fan of his dad, and that was my pitch when I walked in. And I've been a waiter, I've been a bartender, I've sold insurance door to door. It's a very painful experience. If you can imagine selling insurance on a Monday night when in a very hot August in Los Angeles, and people are trying to get home from work and watch Monday Night Football, and I'm trying to sell them an insurance policy. You can get kind of an idea of how hard that was. I sold 10 policies and then immediately quit after that for yet another waiter or bartender job. I've done desk operations for Security Pacific Bank for foreign exchange, and I've run a sporting goods store where I found myself literally collapsed on the floor during the Super Bowl because I was working 100-hour weeks, or 95-hour weeks, and sick during the Super Bowl, and just barely keeping the place open. And none of the college students that I had hired would come in at 6:30 in the morning to unload the very heavy weight equipment from the truck. I had to do all that myself. So that was a tough job. I've been an intern for the Los Angeles Lakers, where I did a project for them. This was during my time at USC in the entrepreneur program, in the MBA program. And let me track back and get to that. All of these examples of jobs that I've had over the years are the result of an interest of mine, one way or another, a way to make money, a way to do something that I like to do or that I was curious about, and eventually I felt the ceiling above me and decided when I was 22 that I wanted to go and get my MBA, thinking that if I get my MBA, I can make all of my mistakes on school time and then have a perfect career after that. Well, life doesn't work like that. So, but I didn't know that until actually going through that experience myself. And I mean, you're here and you take a test and you want to get 100 and there's no way to grade yourself on 0 to 100 necessarily in the real world. There are ways. I mean, everybody has ratings that they go through with their bosses on an annual basis, but it's not like that in college. In college, you're competing with everybody for perfection. I applied to USC and really wanted to get into the entrepreneur program. Had read an article about a professor that I wanted to study under. Her name was John Hoffman, and her dad wanted a boy, so I guess named her John. She was kind of a spitfire, and had a real influence on me. When I applied, I got a rejection letter, and I was working as a bartender that day that I got that rejection letter. I was living in LA, and right after the shift was over, I drove down to USC and into the dean of admissions office, and I said, "Can I please speak with the dean?" He was actually available, and I said, "There must be some mistake here. I really need to go here. I really need to study for being an entrepreneur. I need some formal education in that regard." And within about an hour, he wrote out my acceptance letter. So that's how that happened. And
I don't know if that would occur today, but anyway, more power to you, I guess, in '93.
Well, it's part of it is just about showing up and stating your case. And so that was a big deal for me, and I was able to study the things that I needed to, all about every aspect of entrepreneurship. I wrote a business plan for it was an online computer auction, a computer parts auction. Now this is 1992 that I wrote that. eBay comes around in 1995. So I tend to have the right ideas at the right time. Sometimes I don't execute on them though, and that would be one of those times. But I still have that old business plan. Anyway, I was fascinated with the internet and the concept of using networked information and networked learning. And after I came out of after I graduated from my MBA. I looked for positions in the software world. I found one at T-Stat Cable, which eventually became AT&T. That's not on there. I didn't have room for everything, and that was more of a consulting project. Actually, do I want to tell this? Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys some painful stuff. How about that? All right. So I once shared an office with a Coke machine. So that's fun. And
A closet or an office?
No, it was just a room with a soda machine in it, and I was originally outside the CEO's office, but they decided to move me to the soda machine room, and I think that was kind of a passive-aggressive way of shuttling me out of their general vicinity.
Alan,
Yeah.
I would love to hear more stories about what you did at Netscape, because you work with a couple of really interesting people who, along with you, have gone on to do some pretty interesting things. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what Netscape is and what happened there.
Sure. So I'm getting there. From there, I went to Delphi Internet, which was the very first. It was actually my second internet job, and I worked on media properties like X-Files and America's Cup and the Rolling Stones tour and anything that came up for News Corp. And that was in Cambridge, Mass. That was really a lesson in how to throw a lot of money at media properties online and see what works and what doesn't. But there was very little strategy there. After a round of layoffs there, I decided to come back to California, and not just come to California, but specifically to go to Northern California because I wanted to work at Netscape. When I was at TCI, I had seen the Mosaic browser for the first time in 1993 and was fascinated by it. And at the end of the day, all it really was a representation of text with the images in line. It wasn't much more than that at the time. It was just rendered in a way that people didn't expect before. So sometimes the real innovation happens from unexpected places. And I interviewed with the head of the online service. His name's Hugh, and real hero of mine. And Hugh at Netscape said, just figure out what we're going to do with making money from the website. And I had a 3-week consulting job. I stayed at a travel lodge for that 3-week period. And by the end of that 3-week period, I had 12 advertisers up and running, paying us $30,000 a month each. Companies including EDS and Toyota and Swatch watches and a variety of others. And these were among the first banners on the internet that were paid advertising. And it was early 1995. And from there, we realized that Netscape had a lot of traffic because it had the browser. And it was an opportunity to turn that traffic into users for other services, like anybody who had a search engine. So Yahoo, Excite, InfoSeek, Lycos, Magellan, easily 20, 30 others were all vying for the same traffic. And they were all getting it from one place, from the Mosaic browser, the Netscape browser. So my job was to work with teams inside Netscape and work with teams at other companies to create a program to transfer the value of that advertising to in the form of a sponsorship. And the way we did that was both by creating banner advertising, which, if anybody knows the pixel sizes of the original ads, there were 468 pixels by 60. That was a dimension that a couple of my colleagues and I looked at and went like this when we were looking at the layout of the web page and said, that looks like it should be the right dimension. Next thing you know, it's an industry standard. A few other industry standards just happened to come about from being one of the very first people to actually look at the web log files. So I would look at the web log files to attach them to any email message that I'd send to an advertiser, and that became the proof of the advertising and the proof of the calculation of the CPM, the cost per thousand, for that advertising. And I started getting some complaints from advertisers that they wanted to appear on not just the what's new page, but the what's cool page or the internet search page or even the fish cam page. And so working with our webmaster, Bill, we created a rotation so that a variety of ads could rotate on those different pages. That was the first dynamic advertising on the internet that we created. And so with that combination of the display of the advertising, the proof of the advertising through the data from the log files, and the dynamic advertising placement that evened out the placement of each ad on each page, and accommodating other needs. For example, separating out the FishCam page for Swatch so that they could exclusively appear on that page. That was yet another example of an innovation, and that was targeting. So.
Why don't we, I mean, it's so fascinating what you're doing at Netscape. It might be fun. I don't know, Mark, if you have some questions you want to kind of pepper with, but I kind of want to get the audience a little bit involved because I am seeing a lot of computer screens up. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that this is a great opportunity. Like, Alan has this incredible experience from the beginning of the internet times to doing other stuff now. And I think everything that's below the line are companies that you've started. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. That? So I just want you all to start thinking out some questions, and I'm going to pass the mic around. So, Mark, I'm going to let you start.
Well, and you alluded to it, but it might be interesting to talk about the circumstances of you leaving Netscape and how that evolved into PassPoints and the idea.
So after close to 4 years, I had the realization that Netscape was selling its customers off for pennies on the dollar to Yahoo, InfoSeek, Excite, and all the search engines. And the programs that I helped create brought in $170 million of advertising dollars in just 3.5 years, and from zero. So starting at zero, and then 3.5 years later, we have a chunk of change, $170 million. And that's at a 75% gross margin. So almost pure profit. And that's easy to do when you have the traffic. It's not easy to do when you have the expectations about what to do with the traffic and so on and so forth. But what I was realizing was that when we were selling all of these customers off in the net search campaign, which is a version of advertising that was transformed so that the ads become sponsorships, and the sponsorship promotes content rather than an ad, and that content is in the form of what we called a license plate, which would be a frame, and that frame had the search engine brand like Yahoo and the box for doing the searching from the Netscape page, and then about 20 or 25 different categories of links below it. And with my then boss, Barbara, who is one of the best bosses I've ever had, she and I created a system that managed to collapse the complexity that it took to do 5 different $5 million deals with companies and get them all signed and done in a matter of a few days, actually like 72 hours. So, and the way that we did that was by creating the program around it. So we created a door, and the door was thin enough that one company could go through at a time. And what I'm describing here is, just follow me from an example. It's not an actual door, but it's a contract. Whoever signs first is the early bird, and the early bird gets the worm type of a door. So it's an incentive, and that's how we created NetSearch. And we had companies that were about to go public, driving over to the Netscape campus with their contract that we gave them, signing these $5 million contracts to hand them to us. And the first one would get the first position for 3 months, and the second one would get the second position. It would rotate until the year was out. And this was a bulk transfer of viewership from Netscape to other companies. And that was a sponsorship model. In the course of that sponsorship model, these search engines became very, very big. And that was when I realized that we were selling off these customers for pennies on the dollar. And I thought that if Netscape had this problem, if people were going through to Netscape to Yahoo and then staying with Yahoo and not coming back, and we had some data about that. Plus, you had stock prices that were going in different directions at the time, which further enhanced that thesis.
So fast forward to what you dawned on and
Right.
how they saw maybe no value in what you ended up doing about it.
Yeah, so I saw that Netscape had a problem with retaining customers and bringing them back, because they were always, these customers who used the website were always one click away from being lost forever by Netscape, and Netscape had no way of bringing them back. So I set out to build a system, software as a service at the time. This is 1998. And it was a loyalty system where you can pay for customers to come back and fill out a survey, click on an ad, refer a friend, make a purchase. You can incentivize anything. And this service was called PassPoints. And the concept was we enabled anybody who had a website that was a merchant or a web portal to create their own loyalty program and use these points, mint the points themselves, which was unique. And we had a multi-threaded architecture that allowed that. So we enabled anybody to create their own loyalty program without having to have the infrastructure for it. And this was back in 1998. It was way ahead of its time. We had filed a patent, had started the company, but before I did that, I needed to get Netscape's permission to go about doing that because I was a full-time employee there. And that's not a small thing, and you want to do things in the right order. So I offered the idea up to Netscape management, and they said that they would pass on it. So I asked if I can pursue it myself, and they said yes, and I left the company in order to raise money for PassPoints. I recruited a team of 13 people, mostly engineers, but a couple sales and marketing people too. And we started one of the first online loyalty service providers. Other companies that were in the area were examples of which were NetCentives and MyPoints and WebStakes, which became called Promotions.com. Now, these companies were going after much bigger companies and sometimes in going after the promotion space. So while we were working away with Guy Kawasaki's Garage.com, which we had applied to, and at the time, Garage.com is something that you see all the time now where you have business plan competitions, whereas at the time that we started PassPoints, it was a rarity to have a business plan competition, but we won a seat at the table. We were one of the 40 heaven clients for Garage.com out of 400,000 business plans that they had reviewed. And that led to a 10-minute pitch where I stood in front of 200 VCs, and they were pretty much all partners, very few associates in the room at the time. And that led to us raising $1.3 million to build that company.
So you worked at that, you built up some intrinsic value, and then essentially there was some interest from sort of the marketplace, if you will, in terms of suitors, companies that were interested. I mean, you yourself faced a decision, I guess, which is, do I continue to grow this company and see it through, or is there an exit opportunity?
Yeah, and we very quickly we saw that there was a lot of money that was being captured by PassPoints and Netscape. They had both gone public. They both had I can't remember the amount of money. Maybe it was $120 million in the bank compared to the 1.3 million that we had. And there were dozens of companies in the online loyalty space. Now, this is the first company that I've ever started that I've ever started with outside funds. And we were very quickly realizing that we were going to need help, either a joint venture or somebody to buy us, or to raise money from somebody with deep pockets. So we went out looking, and in the process of having these conversations, which are not easy to have, because you don't want to advertise that you are looking for a way to sell your company. Sometimes you don't even want to advertise that you're looking for raising money either. You want to.
Yeah, you're afraid in a sense of looking desperate, or the market conditions not being optimal.
You want to be able to control the message, and that's very difficult to do when you see that the market is, that you've picked a market that is red hot, and you've got companies like Netscape signing AOL, which had just bought Netscape, which took them off the table, and that was upsetting to me. But there are always other ways in, and it's just one account that we were going after. But we had decided to that through segmentation, that was the way that we were going to compete, and we enabled the little guy, any small business that didn't necessarily have their own webmaster or didn't have their own technical staff, that we were going to enable them to be able to create their own online loyalty program simply by placing some HTML code into their shopping.
In the interest of time, I'll talk about kind of the players with this transaction.
Right.
The players, the price, the pitfalls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we ended up finding somebody that wanted to buy us, and that company was Promotions.com, also known as Webstakes, and they made an offer to buy our company for $44 million. This was December of 1999, and we had another offer from Netscape for $37 million. We took the higher offer from Promotions.com, even though they were in New York, and thereby declining the offer from Netscape. And then 2 days later was the turn of the millennium, so we had a nice New Year's party, and then it was time to get to work, closing that deal. Now, what was signed 2 days before the millennium was the letter of intent. The letter of intent is either binding or non-binding, but as a business person, you honor every obligation that you have, and we had negotiated hard for one particular provision of that, which was an exit clause, so that if for any reason, for the acquirer's reason or ours, that anybody had to walk away from the deal, that we would get paid $300,000. And the reason that was important to us was because we were in the middle of looking for funds from VCs, and we were disrupting that process. So that process was really had a very quantifiable value to it in disrupting it. And
Yeah, I guess management obviously was sidetracked with executing on the deal and not focused on pushing out new releases of the product, et cetera.
right. That's right. We were focused on due diligence and documenting everything and getting ready for selling the company. We had already had a few dozen small business merchants who had signed up, but the problem is it was an all-stock deal, and in January of 2000 and February of 2000, the acquirer's stock started going down and down and down and down, eventually declining to about 10% of what it was even a month earlier. And that really killed the valuation for the deal. And we tried renegotiating it. What we didn't realize at the time was that they were also trying to sell themselves to yet another company. I didn't learn this until 5 years later. But forget about that for a second, because there's more to this story. So what I'm going to tell you is a story that is it's the painful story of my career, which is one where I started a company with friends and we build it up and we raise money and we build a great team and then we accept an offer to get acquired, but then that offer then the acquirer decides that they can't do it anymore, so they walk away, and now we're left in a situation where not only do we not have the acquisition to rely on, but now we need to desperately find money to keep the business going. And fortunately, I had negotiated that $300,000 walkaway provision. But here's what I didn't expect, and what became a real learning, a surprise learning lesson for me, was that there's a big difference between negotiating something and making it happen. And I found myself in a hotel in New York in early February of 2000 with about a foot of snow outside. I was there with my former father-in-law, who was an advisor to our company. We had a meeting with the acquirer. Their company was run by two kids who were my age at the time, and they had no reason at all to give us the $300,000. And we're standing there in this room, and thinking we have no leverage. We're going to have to go home and shut the whole thing down, and it was terrifying. So what I learned that day was the power of nonverbal communication, and what happened was something that I didn't see coming at all. We were sitting on the opposite side of Dan was the CEO. I can't remember the CFO's name. I think it was Michael. And my former father-in-law, I'm now remarried, so that's why I said former, we had decided, the two of us, that we were going to go back into the room, ask them for the $300,000, which they had owed us, and if they were not going to give it to us, that we were just going to put our coats on and walk out the door. And when he had a little driver's cap that he put on.
This is your former father-in-law.
Right. And he put it on like this, and then he had a scarf, and he took the scarf, he put his jacket on, and took the scarf, and threw the scarf around his neck. And he's a very, very conservative, straight-laced kind of guy. But when he did that move, and he was really just really kind of got into it and threw the scarf around, it left the guys on the other side of the table slack-jawed. They didn't know what hit them. And they said to us, okay, we'll have the check for you for $300,000 tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. And that was that. And I learned the power of nonverbal communication. Now that is something you cannot learn in school. All right.
And then, but from there, obviously, that was a pretty sobering moment. It's wonderful that they made good on the walkaway clause. But sort of, how do you pick yourself up from that and sort of, find the energy and the resolve to kind of do what's next?
Well, we had a. We had every reason to continue. No, I think I'm good with this. Thanks. We had every reason to continue, but we still needed to find money from other sources. And so we accepted we went back to the company that we had rejected before, Netscape, to see if they wanted to make another offer. They had made an offer for $37 million before, but that offer was off the table. So a month later, we went back to them, and they did make an offer again, but it was for $4 million. And we thought about it. You have to think about it. You're made an offer. You're a board member of a company. You have to consider these offers. And we decided that we couldn't keep the team together in order to keep that offer. Now, we rejected that offer, and that led to us being put into a list of companies that Netscape decided to sue, 16 companies in the industry, because they wanted to reestablish their own value of their intellectual property. And doing so meant suing the entire industry over a patent that, as it turns out, was invalidly issued. And we only knew that because when they sued the 15 companies and put us in that list, they gave us 15 new friends. 15 new friends to talk to. And so here we are on the receiving end of an intellectual property lawsuit, and realizing that the author of the patent had worked for one of these 16 companies. And long story short, Netscape ends up going out of business. So even if we had sold ourselves to them, it wouldn't have led to anything anyway. And that led my view of that time in the internet, 99 to 2001, looking at it as if it's rearranging chairs on the Titanic, where the only people that really gain are the lawyers, and everybody else gains a lot of pain.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one thing that I've always thought about in terms of both entrepreneurship and even working for corporations is sort of the struggle to go deep and narrow and really gain core strengths and skill sets in a certain functional area, or whether to kind of be a generalist in terms of management and grow teams that way. So I don't know. I mean, you've worked obviously publishing, now a little bit in blockchain, et cetera. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of going deep and narrow versus broad-based generalist?
It's a great question, and I have at any given time in your life, you do the one thing that is the appropriate thing for you to do at that time. And when you advance in your life and you're looking back, you can't have any regrets, because you did that thing that you thought was the right thing to do. So if it is if the choice is to go general, going general is often associated with taking an idea from scratch and just doing everything until you can get the experts to join the team. I like being in situations like that. I was in a situation like that at Netscape, where I was the first person to put the ads up and get the advertisers and figure out that program and do that with net search and even one quarter did that with I looked at the version 3.0 of the browser that we were releasing and decided that I would pitch management on allowing for the placement of bookmarks from some of our advertisers who wanted to pay us, and I ended up saving the quarterly revenue on the last day of the quarter by doing so.
Yeah, I mean, Netscape must have been a kind of tremendously interesting culture and everything back then. But that point about being a jack of all trades makes me think of, and I think you guys might have even heard of this anecdote. I actually worked with this woman named Lori Goler at eBay, and she was in marketing and got a call from a headhunter about a role at Facebook where this is pretty early at Facebook, they wanted her to come and lead people operations, recruiting, HR. And she had zero experience in that area. And she interviewed, I think, with Sheryl Sandberg, and she sought some advice from a friend or colleague. And I think that this is where I'm going with this anecdote that you might have heard, which is when someone offers you a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat.
Right.
If there is a space or an interest that you have, maybe you don't have that exact experience, or you might feel you're not a fit, but this is just my own 2 cents. You guys have different takes on it, perhaps, but surround yourself with that that dynamism and energy of a certain category or industry, because you're going to benefit, but also learn a lot from it.
Take the worst seat on the rocket ship.
Yeah.
If they offer it to you.
Hey, Alan. Hey, Mark. Thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate it. This question's for Mark, actually. I noticed you worked at Coursera, and I feel like in the past couple of years, there's been a huge trend in the rise of like MLOCs, like you have Udemy, EDX, Coursera, and I feel like education has slowly moved online. So people produce producing videos, producing content, quizzes. What do you think the next big step is in online education? How is education going to change from now in the next 5 to 10 years? And how is Coursera going to be leading that change? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So yeah, you're right that in the early years of online education, MOOCs, massive open online courses, was sort of where it was at, and bringing a lot of learners from other countries into that domain and presenting content to them for sort of their own enrichment. I do work on the degrees business at Coursera, so it's my role to work with our university partners. So essentially, people can, there's a lot of hybrid models and blended models, but you may be aware that there are thousands of students that are getting degrees in a purely online format and not on premise or on campus. But specifically to answer your question, I think the trend would be towards certifications and specializations. So for people either that live outside of the US or maybe don't have the geographic means or financial means to attend university, sort of bettering themselves by improving their skill sets by perhaps learning machine learning or artificial intelligence or getting a specialization in data science. So I think that's where a lot of the incremental pathways are going to be in terms of career developments.
There are many ways of stratifying the market and segmenting the market. I was working on another startup idea that I was having a lot of trouble with getting up and running. It was a productivity idea called Next 2 Minutes, or NEX.TT. And this was my first pivot after Microsoft. And I wanted to, this is a 2011-12 timeframe. my goal at the time was, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, was to find out a way to do mobile productivity because my phone knows everything about me, and yet I can do so little with the phone. And I had a lot of trouble getting a prototype up and running, so that led me to a totally different pivot idea, which was an online marketplace for hiring experts at $25 per question, and that was answer 2. The competition that I ran into there was Quora, which had raised $120 million on 0 revenues, which meant they wanted that industry and they weren't going to give it up for anybody. And I didn't want to come in 2nd place. I didn't want to come in 10th place. I tried pivoting yet again for specific communities, and I looked at the Bitcoin community. And the Bitcoin community in 2013 was really ramping up, but I underestimated the ability to convert people in the Bitcoin community to the service portal that I'd created, because they were a very unique community with their own divisions, their own issues, and their own services in place that they'd go to, like Reddit. After pivoting that and shutting that down, I went to another friend with whom I started the company SafeCash. SafeCash was a blockchain-based payment rail that enabled companies to create their own, enabled banks to create their own currency and enable a PayPal-like service for any of their clients. So you can see how you start in one area like productivity and go to online education to try to solve a problem, and then through an existing conversation that you're having with somebody who's a friend and starting a business in a different area, end up hooking up with that person, and then invest, and then winding up realizing that, okay, maybe the blockchain-based payment rail was too early, but thank God I bought some Bitcoin.
My name is Anae. I'm studying computer science in the College of Letters and Sciences. I had a question for Alan. What's like the main thing that's changed about the internet since your Netscape days to now?
What's the best thing that's changed?
What's like the main thing that's changed? Could be good or bad.
I love the ability to interact with the phone, the iPhone, the mobile phones, and the services the apps that you can use on them over broadband. I mean, that's without a doubt that changes everything.
Yeah, probably just the sheer power of the internet has brought so much content as well, and so that's opened up a lot of opportunities for businesses. Are we running out of time, or? Oh, you have a question. Oh. I thought you might have been signaling us like, wrap it up.
No, we have about 5 minutes.
Sorry. What is something that you would have liked to know when you were first starting in both your careers that you know now but didn't know back then?
Well, for me, I'll try to answer it. I mean, it took me, I think, a while to learn a little bit of the interpersonal dynamics of managing teams and working with people. And I think it's probably great now that different programs and universities and are delving into interpersonal dynamics, diversity training, but also maybe some of you have taken the Myers-Briggs. So like early on in my career, when I did work with some engineers, I didn't sort of grasp that they didn't like to be, walked up to and interrupted in the middle of their day. That was their focused time. So it caused just some like headbutting a little bit in terms of just group dynamics. And so I think, I would have liked to have been educated and schooled a little bit more on sort of like the personality types.
I would totally agree with that. There's nothing harder in the world than relating to people, relating to lots of people in lots of different ways. Everybody's got their own needs and contexts and things that they're focused on. And it's been, it's really difficult. Relationships are hard.
But with practice, you get better at it, of course.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing too, and I want to shift this a little bit. Actually, shift it a lot. We were talking before on the way up here about climate change, and I wanted to put a question out to you guys. What would you do knowing that you had 10 years left to make a difference in your climate? What would you do with the advanced knowledge that you have about that is different from what you would do today? What you would do yesterday versus tomorrow? Anybody? She would reduce the amount of water that she consumes. And yeah, I mean, from what I understand, individual actions are not going to cut it, and they're important, and we all need to do everything that we can do, but yeah.
Do you think like corporations do better? But I feel like even individual actions can make a big difference if we all do the same things. Whereas corporations, if we have a few hundred of them taking steps, that would make a big difference, like cutting down carbon footprint, or like corporations, for example, Google just going to recycled paper or paper made of, sugarcane, gas, or bamboo pulps, and not cutting down trees.
We need to fundamentally rethink almost everything about our society and the institutions that we have and how we relate to each other in a world that is not limitless anymore. And knowing these limits, it presents a really unique challenge. Now there are opportunities out there. There are businesses that you can start. But it really, climate change really does shift the conversation. I'll give you an example. If you are thinking about starting a venture capital fund, venture capital funds have a 10 to 12 year life typically. Well, we have just been given the gift of knowing that 2 years ago, or last year we had 12 years, now it's 11, soon to be 10 years. So how do you write a business plan for 10 years from now when all of this change is going to happen in the climate, when sea levels are rising and fires are happening just miles away even, and drought, and all of this unpredictability is guaranteed to be baked in over the next 10 to 100 years. How do you plan anything when you have that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, that's an interesting, perspective, because it's almost like you have to have the here and now in mind, but you also have to be forecasting what's ahead on the horizon. I think that the people that can do both of those in entrepreneurship and business will be the winners.
Well, I know that we are we're running out of time, but I wanted to present that as kind of the last question to you guys, because I know that that there is a small group of us that are going out to dinner after, and those that are interested in the answers to that particular question, any thoughts that you have on it, we would love to hear that.
So that would be fantastic, and we're going to have an opportunity now. People will get feedback, and
Okay.
also have an opportunity to come up and talk to you for the next 10 minutes, and maybe from that we can see.
Sure. Great.
Thank you very, very much for bringing up medical background.
Thank you.